What if the biggest sign alcohol is affecting someone is how they feel when they're not drinking? Most people measure alcohol's impact by how drunk they get or how bad the hangover is. But the brain doesn't work that way. It adapts quietly, in ways that don't feel like damage. They just feel like normal life. Understanding these hidden changes reveals how alcohol reshapes sleep, mood, and focus, long before anything feels obviously wrong. Here's something that seems to make no sense. Alcohol helps people fall asleep faster. So why do so many regular drinkers wake up exhausted? Alcohol is a sedative. It slows the nervous system down, which is why a drink at night can feel relaxing. But sleep isn't just unconsciousness. The brain moves through cycles throughout the night, and one of the most important is REM sleep. This is where the brain processes memories, regulates emotions, and does its deepest recovery work. Alcohol disrupts that cycle. Even small amounts consumed a few hours before bed can suppress REM sleep, especially in the first half of the night. The brain tries to compensate in the second half, but that rebound sleep is lighter, more fragmented. The result is more waking, restless dreams, and mental fog the next morning. The body spent hours unconscious, but the brain didn't actually recover. That exhaustion isn't just tiredness. It's a measurable gap in brain restoration, and it can happen after just 1 or 2 drinks. But disrupted sleep only explains part of the energy drop, and this is where it gets interesting. There's a second mechanism happening, and most people never connect it to alcohol at all. Alcohol triggers the release of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. That's part of why drinking feels pleasant, but the brain notices, and it adapts. With repeated dopamine spikes, the brain gradually reduces its sensitivity to dopamine over time. This process is called downregulation. The brain produces less dopamine naturally and becomes less responsive to the dopamine it does produce. On days without alcohol, the system runs below its normal set point. The result isn't dramatic, it's subtle. A mild flatness, reduced motivation, a low-grade sense that things feel slightly harder than they should. Activities that used to feel rewarding, exercise, socializing, creative work start feeling less engaging. And this is the part most people miss. The energy dip isn't stress. It isn't a bad week. It's the brain running at a lower baseline, quietly adjusted by a chemical it learned to expect. That same shift has another effect, one that's even easier to mistake for something else entirely. The brain uses 2 main types of signals to regulate mood. Excitatory signals activate the nervous system. Inhibitory signals calm it down. The primary calming system relies on a chemical called GABA. Alcohol enhances GABA activity, which creates that feeling of relaxation. But the brain adapts. It reduces its own GABA sensitivity and increases excitatory activity to compensate. This is the brain trying to maintain balance. But when alcohol isn't present, that compensation tips the scale. The nervous system becomes slightly overactive. This shows up as increased anxiety, more irritability, a lower threshold for stress. Small frustrations feel larger. Things that would normally pass feel harder to shake. And it doesn't feel alcohol-related. It just feels like a harder week. The anxiety isn't coming from outside circumstances. It's coming from a nervous system that reorganized itself around a substance and is now running hotter without it. That same nervous system shift also changes how the brain handles attention, and this one shows up in very specific, recognizable ways. The prefrontal cortex manages sustained attention, decision-making, and impulse control. It's also one of the areas most sensitive to alcohol's effects. Research has found that regular alcohol use can reduce gray matter in the prefrontal cortex over time, even in people who don't drink heavily by standard definitions. In daily life, this shows up as difficulty holding focus, increased distractibility, a stronger pull toward immediate stimulation, reaching for a phone, switching tasks, struggling to sit with boredom. The brain has been trained to seek quick dopamine signals. Low stimulation tasks start feeling uncomfortable. This isn't a personality trait. It's a measurable shift in how the brain allocates attention, one that develops gradually, quietly, in proportion to how much the brain has adjusted to alcohol. But here's the most important sign, and it's the hardest one to catch, because it doesn't feel like a sign at all. When the brain adapts to regular alcohol use, it establishes a new baseline. Disrupted sleep becomes normal. Low energy becomes normal. None of it feels severe enough to raise concern. It just becomes the background of everyday life. Scientists who study this process call it allostatic load, the accumulated cost of the brain constantly working to maintain balance against a recurring chemical input. The brain isn't failing, it's adapting. But adaptation has a cost, and that cost gets paid every single day. Most people in this zone don't feel like something is wrong. They feel like this is just how they are. That sense of normal is the sign. This is where it becomes more important. The changes described here, dopamine downregulation, GABA adaptation, prefrontal thinning, are not permanent in most cases. The brain is plastic. It adapts to inputs. And when the input changes, the adaptation changes with it. Research on sleep shows measurable improvement in REM quality within weeks of stopping. Studies on dopamine function show gradual normalization of reward sensitivity over the following months. Neuroimaging research has documented partial recovery of prefrontal gray matter in people who remain abstinent over time. People who stop drinking often describe the same sequence. Sleep improves first, then energy starts to stabilize, then mood becomes more consistent, then focus sharpens. Not overnight, not dramatically, just a slow return toward a baseline the brain had almost forgotten. This matters beyond alcohol. It reflects something fundamental about how the brain works. What gets repeated gets reinforced. What gets removed stops being reinforced. The brain that quietly adapted to alcohol is the same brain that can quietly adapt away from it. These 5 signs: disrupted sleep, lower energy, increased anxiety, reduced focus, and a quiet sense of off, don't look serious on their own, but they share a common mechanism. They're all downstream effects of a brain that reorganized itself around a recurring chemical input. The body is functioning, the day is getting done, but the system is running at a cost most people never measure, because the cost has become the new normal. The hardest part isn't feeling bad enough to notice something is wrong. It's realizing that feeling fine isn't the same as feeling your best.